Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. Today, we are discussing the experience of going from being undocumented to hyper-documented, with a particular focus on sharing the story of our guest, Doctora Aurora Chang, who went from achieving academic success to pivoting in her career and now supporting marginalized scholars in their writing and publishing. Doctora Aurora Chang provides academics with holistic and developmental editing services designed to provide not only practical guidance, but also the emotional and educational support to thrive. Welcome to the podcast, Doctora Aurora.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation to join.
Yes, I know. I recall you had shared on social that you were open to speaking engagements and you shared some potential topics. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, I need to snatch her up for the pod because I'm always looking for good folks. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, for folks who are new to you and your work, can you let us know a little bit? This is the biggest question that I ask, and I know it could take up the whole hour or even the whole day, but whatever you're comfortable sharing about who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I like to say, well, I like to say a lot of different things, but one of them is that I am someone who went from being once undocumented to then becoming hyper-documented. And what I mean by that is I was an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala when I was 5 years old, when I came to this country with my family. And now I'm hyper-documented, meaning that I have a just shitload of papers now, right? So from dissertations, books, articles, but not only that, but it's like a arsenal, if you will, of papers that I've been collecting since I was a little girl. So certificates of achievement, report cards, anything that you can think of. And those have become sort of the symbol of my life, is constantly documenting to compensate for feelings of unworthiness. Because even though I am no longer undocumented, and that was thanks to the Immigration Reform and Control Act decades ago, I still have these kind of internal feelings around what it was like to be undocumented. So that's a little bit about my personal past. Professionally, I've always been in education. I started as a high school teacher, and then I've been in all kinds of like companies and nonprofits. And then for the past 12 years, I was a professor of higher education and curriculum and instruction. And then a year and a half ago, I dropped everything and decided to go full in, you know how that is, on my business. And what I like to say is that I provide academic writing and holistic support for marginalized academics who refuse to be marginalized. So the one thread that all my clients have in common is that they are working towards social justice.
Well, okay, so what I heard you say is that you have had many journeys from being 5 years old and making that big journey from Guatemala to the U.S. And then the journey of, I know just from knowing you and also from what you've shared publicly, that you have been on many campuses. So You've been at UC Berkeley, you've been at Stanford, UT Austin, Loyola, and you've also had various different careers. So it sounds like, yeah, you've gone on a big journey and you've navigating a lot of very difficult transitions. And also you shared the concept of hyper-documentation, of feeling the need to overcompensate for what was once missing, and that becomes a mindset thing of, for a lot of people, not feeling good enough and needing to
Right.
just keep more credentials, more papeles, like more stuff just to prove
Yeah,
your worth. But when
exactly.
is it enough, right?
And, as we're seeing now, part of that hyperdocumentation is centered on a fear that,
Mm,
you're going to get your rights removed, you're going to get your citizenship removed, which most of my life that has felt more theoretical. And now more than ever, it feels absolutely possible with, the Trump administration and with the wanting to rescind birthright citizenship, but also rescinding legal citizenship. And so it's interesting that it's come full circle now, whereas before I would write about it and I did feel in some ways that it was a possibility of a loss, but not in the way that it feels now, where anything that has to do with rights, you just don't know what's right around the bend. So
mhm.
I think it's even more poignant now.
Right. And I'm hearing that it's beyond just the mindset. It is a very real fear. And that, yeah, at least it's interesting because I am someone who is documented. I have the privilege of birthright citizenship. And so for me, even though I have citizenship, there is still that fear because of how we are racialized and
Yes.
how we are seen by others, of having to have your little card, having to bring your documentation everywhere, having to, like in my case, I have my passport card everywhere I go.
Right.
And so I'm glad that you're acknowledging that, because it is a very real fear and it's only worsened this year. And I'm curious about the impacts of that, the impacts of hyper documentation. Because on the one hand, you're trying to equip yourself, arm yourself to make sure you're okay. But then on the other hand, there are psychological costs, there are emotional costs, there are all kinds of other costs. What has come up for you in terms of the costs involved of feeling the need to constantly document, constantly validate, and knowing that sometimes even that it's sometimes not enough?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Because frankly, writing, for anyone that is a writer or has even written, a paper or whatever, it's a long, often painful process. Publishing even more so because it takes so long. And so I think one of the effects of hyperdocumentation for me has been solitude, because writing is something that I've done by myself in front of a computer. I haven't done much community writing. And so it's really impacted sort of my personality in some ways, right? But very inward focused. Also, time. I've spent a lot of time writing, researching, editing, which takes away from time that I could be doing other things like spending with family or having fun. I remember one of the reasons why I left academia was because I forgot what it was like to have fun anymore. I didn't know what I really liked. Like if people would say, "Hey, what's your hobby?" or "What do you want to do?" I was completely lost. I mean, ask me about anything book-wise or writing, I'll go on, but what do I want to do for fun, And so I think in many ways it's kept me insulated, so it protected in some ways. It has felt that way to me, but also has kept me from experiencing some more joy that I could have had in my life. And I think, wow, I have spent like the majority of my life writing and reading and engaging in something around academia. And that has its high points, but it also has its lows. And so that's something that I've thought a lot about since I've left my position as a professor, is what that hyper-documentation has done to my quality. So yeah, that's one of them. The other thing is just the constant paranoia around, is this enough? Is this enough for tenure? Is this enough to um, keep me out of sight, out of mind? I always thought as a young kid, as long as teachers aren't calling me out for behavior, then I'm good. And then no attention to my family. Um, and I think that's carried through even now.
I brought you here to talk about hyperdocumentation. And when I was thinking about hyperdocumentation, the term itself, I was thinking about literally documentation when it comes to like legal matters. And I wasn't defining it as documentation that includes publishing, that includes other more formal venues of documenting your work. And so I find it so interesting that that's where you went, that it's started out maybe in this very real legal process of having documentation to make sure that you can safely stay in this country. But then even when you no longer had that concern, the fear and paranoia didn't go away. So then it translated into the work you did in academia. And what that manifested in was, there are benefits, but then on the cost side, you said it was long, painful, isolating. It took up a good amount of time. And it also led to ultimately feeling less joy, which it sounds like that lack of play and fun and joy was a big impetus for you leaving academia altogether. Is that
Definitely.
okay?
Yeah, no, you captured that beautifully. I think that I was so immersed in my writing in an unhealthy way. And I think that that's why I help academics now to help. Like, you don't have to go that route. You can be an academic, but you can still have joy and have a life and, just really center on the things that really, really matter.
Yeah.
And, I will say, I do love writing. I love that people can read my work, but that doesn't take away from the tedious nature of writing. I believe very strongly that writing is inextricably connected with our identity and our identities and our perceptions of self-worth. And so that's sort of, I'm kind of chuckling inside because I'm like, these are people either getting their PhDs, already have them. So clearly they know how to write and they've been successful. So why is it that they feel this sense of unworthiness or not being good enough? And that's all about the socialization of being a marginalized person, but also the way academia trains us in terms of what's considered legitimate, rigorous style of writing and what's considered quote unquote. So it's just really interesting to me that that's the through line with the clients that I have. Even today, I met with a client who, this scholar is someone who I read when I was in undergrad and who
Wow.
I absolutely admire. When I saw her inquiry form come up, I was like, what? And then when I talked to her today, she's like, I need someone to help me with confidence in my voice. And I was like, holy hell, yes, even at 70 years old, even as a, renowned scholar, she still felt like she wasn't enough and that she needed support, So that was full circle for me today. I was like, wow. Because, we see people and we have an image of their life must be X, Y, and Z. It must be, these writers must flow milk and honey, and it doesn't all of us have that. Part of writing is working through that insecurity and not getting over it, but identifying the tension in the writing and not going away from that, but leaning in to that tension. That's what makes really robust, engaging writing. So yeah, and I see this time and again, where I'm meeting with clients that I'm like, I've read their work, it's absolutely outstanding. And it's still not enough.
And I know that imagine, or from what I know about you, most of your clients are academics, whether they're grad students, they might be professors, some case,
Right.
very well-established senior professors.
Yes.
And so it sounds like there's something about the academic writing process that makes it so that people internalize a lot of these things. So the messaging around the lack of worthiness, the messaging around the work not being legitimate enough or not rigorous enough, or just in general, not being enough at the end of the day. And so in helping people work through their writing, you're also helping them to work on themselves and their own personal growth.
I think that's actually what I'm really doing. Writing is a vehicle, but I am working through helping folks, thought partnering with folks to work through some of those insecurities, those internalized feelings, that inner critic, that they won't need me anymore, so that they'll finish their experience with me and feel like, I got this, and wow, all along, it was all just in my head, So yeah, that's why I love doing this work, is that, the writing is the vehicle or the mechanism, but really what I'm doing is helping to see people the way I see them, which is talented, beautiful, groundbreaking, and to claim and own that.
I'm taking a quick pause to tell you about one of my favorite time-saving tools, Descript. I use it to transcribe interviews, generate podcast show notes, create short social media clips, and record easy-to-share tutorials for my clients. It's also incredibly useful for academics. You can create accessible course materials with captions and transcripts, share explainer videos with your students, and make all of your material searchable and easier to organize. If you're looking for a more efficient way to work, check out my affiliate link in the show notes. I love that. And for you, it did take you leaving academia to focus solely on this. Were there other things that came up for you or other catalysts that led to you ultimately saying goodbye to academia? Although I would argue that you're doing higher ed adjacent work.
Absolutely.
Like me, I'm like, I left, but I'm still kind of in some ways in it with my clientele.
Exactly. Like we didn't go to industry per se, right?
Right.
So we're so identity is still tied up in it in some ways. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that led me to leave academia was the toxicity of the culture of academia. So in 2019 or 20, I ended up being diagnosed with ductal carcinoma, which is a form of breast cancer. And while I don't think academia was, the cause of it, I don't think it helped because I was just not taking good care of myself, and when that happened, my whole life just kind of turned upside down. And I was like, wow, you need to face your mortality and you need to start thinking about what you really want to do. Because I felt that in academia, in the spaces I was in, there was a lack of support. There was a lot of infighting, about ridiculous things, petty things in academia, but also just the toxic nature of it, like going into a meeting and like dreading what theatrics might play out, at any given moment, or what, microaggression is going to come your way, the disingenuousness of some folks, so I was exhausted emotionally, physically, that's not even counting all the work you have to do, teaching, research, and service. But I just felt like in some ways I was pushed out, versus, oh, let me make this decision. I felt like academia almost left me with no other choice but to leave or die, or, or get, or get more ill. And so I don't think if that wouldn't have happened, I don't know if I would have had the impetus to leave when I did. But I am still glad I did, because my quality of life is a million times better. There is life after academia. A lot of people think that there's not. But that's the other thing, right? Is that academics that leave all of a sudden think they don't have skills. So how did that happen? And it's all of that socialization of like, this is all you can do. This is the most important thing. You have to sacrifice yourself. And especially as a woman of color, like, we just get so much additional tax and burden placed on us in those roles. So it's amazing to be in a position right now where I call the shots. I don't have to ask permission to do things. I work with people that I decide to work with. It's very empowering.
Yeah. I appreciate you, first of all, for sharing what you shared. I know you're not the only one. I've had other people who have very similar stories of experiencing something that was a very real kind of facing your mortality, and that combined with existing in a toxic work environment, that being the thing that ultimately, in your case, I'm glad that you said it, like you got pushed out. Because if you did have the right conditions, the right support, etc., it does. I don't understand that. I mean, I have a parallel story in that I got very, very ill more than once. And that illness is what led me to ultimately leaving, because for me, it was about life or death. And it's unfortunate that so many of us have to get to that point.
Exactly.
To then not even, we can say it was our choice, but we were pushed out too. Yeah.
Yes. Like really, what kind of a choice is that,
Yeah.
And I always tell people now, don't wait for your body to shut down for you to make the right move, exit, transition. If you're feeling like the ratio of, misery to joy is high, there is another place for you. There's another route. There's another journey. It's not worth self-destruction that happens.
The other thing too is that you've been doing this work for a while, even before you launched full time.
Yeah,
And I recall you were doing this even when I was a graduate student.
that's true.
So I'm curious how your mission has evolved over time, especially how it has evolved recently and the time that you've been doing this full time, because you've been doing this work. You've been, as you say, like helping writers become better writers. And I know now that you have an entire framework around how you support others. So I would love for you to share a little bit more again around that evolution of your work and your mission.
Yeah, so I've been doing this since 2010. And the way that this happened was I have a really good friend, Danielle Alcindor, she at UT, and she was finishing up her dissertation. And she was like, hey, listen, can you edit my dissertation? And I was like, yeah, sure. And she's like, only under one condition, though, I have to pay you. And I was like, oh, no, no, I can't do that. Long story short, she was my first client, and it was so hard to accept money for that work at that point of my life for a lot of different reasons. But then it just kind of kept on growing, word of mouth. And then, so really, when I started this, it was about the technical act of writing, right? Like helping people with the details of the writing, the aesthetic, and then as I continued to work with different people, I started noticing that through line around not being enough or just needing support, needing a thought partner. And my last year of full-time institutional work, I ended up making more money part-time doing editing than I was full-time as an administrator. And so I was like, bingo, this is the time to take the leap. I was still scared to death to take that risk, but I am so glad I did. And, now really my aim is around helping marginalized academics really claim their power and claim their voice, both in writing, but also just in their lives. I think we have more power and agency than we know. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. And I love being the person that is, cheering people on, believing in people, just helping folks be their most authentic selves in every way. So it really has evolved over time.
I know you mentioned that it started out as like helping people with the technicalities of the writing.
Right.
And now it's more you're there to be a thought partner and you're there to support them in the deeper work of the mental challenges, the mindset stuff. I'm sure there's a lot more actually, and that's what I want to hear from you. I'm curious, beyond what we've already shared about like what's come up for some of your clients in terms of what they're thinking and their self-worth. What are some other common challenges you've noticed that your clients experience in their writing? And also, how do you specifically support them to work through some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think the things that I see are a sort of exhaustion, writing exhaustion, like I can't look at this paper anymore, or I don't have enough energy to write after everything that I'm doing in one day. That's a big one. Another one is just feeling like, is it worthwhile for me to put this much work into something that is probably going to be read by very few people? Because, in academia, you have to have access to paid databases to actually access an article, for example, or even books that are put out in public. They can be so narrow in terms of what they're about, because that's what getting a dissertation requires, is to really focus in on something small, that it may not have like that big, vast impact. Some academics are amazing at this and the crossover into mainstream is natural, or I shouldn't say natural. They've been able to make that jump. But the other thing I would say that I see often is folks either being scared or reticent about including anything personal in their academic writing. So they want to draw on their personal lived experiences or on their family's lived experiences, but there's a fear that A, it won't be considered rigorous. That's not empirical. B, that they're going to get judged or critiqued for being quote unquote subjective. And C, ethical reasons of like, I don't want to put my family on blast, or, am I willing to put some of my personal stuff out there knowing that it's going to be there forever? So those are some of the big ones. But I think another one that just comes to mind for me is people that are on the tenure track and the almost paralysis that people feel as they get closer and realize, oh my gosh, I haven't published enough. And then there's this heightened anxiety and dis-ease. So yeah, those are some of the things that I continually encounter.
And I know that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to supporting people, But what are some ways that you have supported, if you can think about an example or two tied to what you just shared, or any of the examples you just shared of the common challenges, in what ways have you supported them?
Yeah. So I meet people where they are. I don't make assumptions about how they're showing up. For me, I require that people be vulnerable and honest. I mean, that's some of the questions I ask before I meet with someone is, are you going to be willing to share some of your real concerns? Are you going to be willing to set some boundaries in order to complete this, right? Because I can't help if there's not a willingness there to do that. I also really believe, and I've learned this over time, is I need to have consistent interaction with every client that I have. So like a weekly check-in at least, or maybe it's going to be hour-long, depending if we're doing a real-time writing session. But I don't do a lot of the like back and forth, like, when you submit a paper to a professor, and then they have all the comments on it. That doesn't really happen until the very, very end when I'm doing polishing. So my approach is, let me know who you are, what you're writing about. Let me get so familiar with your style, with your purpose, that by the time I do line edits, it's going to be so quick because I'm going to have the big stuff taken care of. And so just a lot of consistent thought partnering, consistent support. I always have to tell people I am not your evaluator because people usually come to me and they're nervous because they've either never worked with an editor before or have and have had a bad experience. Like they've been ghosted, or they've worked with an editor who frankly has no orientation towards social justice. And then they insert their own politics or comments with the client. And then they're like, oh my God, no, I feel more harmed, And so, yeah. And then the overall editing support, like helping them with improving academic language and, just having more faith in their process, So like anything else, it's a game of persistence, and if you have somebody accompanying you, it makes it that much easier. I feel like my goal is to reduce anxiety with my clients. And if that makes me the most happy is when I don't know if I feel relieved after talking to you, or, I feel better. And that's the win for me, is that people can approach this work without feeling like they have to endure so much, that they can do this at a pace that feels right to them, and that when they do have to pick up the pace because of the deadline, they have someone they can lean on.
What that brings to mind is how, I too work with academics, a lot of graduate students, and a lot of the people that I've worked with have never had a relationship with writing and with professors, advisors, or people reviewing their work that was, for lack of a better word, healthy or supportive, compassionate. And so what I'm hearing from you with the work that you do of thought partnering, of checking in, of getting to know them, their style, etc., is that you are helping them to redefine the possibilities around how you can write that's not harmful. And it also reminds me of my process of co-authoring a book where we worked with the editors at UC Press. And we were shocked, jaws dropped, shocked at how positive and supportive the experience was. The entire experience. There was from beginning to end. And we were like, we've never had a situation like this. Like, we were ready to be torn apart. We were ready for people to like just tell us to rewrite everything. Even writing with each other. Like we both have collaborated with others. But, we've had instances where even as collaborators, are not always seeing eye to eye, or not always as gentle. And so I just want to echo back that this is possible. It is possible to write in a way that feels good with the support that you need. And you are doing that with the work that you're doing. And I feel like our work is very parallel. Like, I'm not going to say it's exactly the same because we do different work. Mine is more around like the productivity support stuff, and yours is very much in the writing, although I know we both coach too. But I
Right.
just love that you offer this because we need more folks doing this work of letting people know that there is another way. There's a light at the
There
end of the tunnel.
is. There is. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of demand for this kind of
Mm-hmm.
work. So, for folks listening that are thinking about a exit plan, we need more, developmental editors, more coaches, more.
Yeah.
It's really important work. It's transformation.
Yeah. And the other thing too, you haven't directly said this, but I think you do this too, where, well, I mean, not I think, I know, it's that culturally relevant support is also much needed. When you're saying,
Yes.
there's a high demand, there's also a high demand for that. And that's why I'm sure we
Oh
have
my God.
very particular types of clients that come to us because of shared identities or shared experiences or even shared values.
I love
So,
that. Yes, that
yeah.
resonates because, like, I know even with a lot of my clients who are Spanish speaking, like,
Hmm.
we'll go back and forth, in Spanish and in English, and that is just it's a comfort for people.
Yes.
I noticed that um, a lot of my clients that are bilingual in Spanish, when they want to go to a place that's more emotional or vulnerable, they go to Spanish.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that I can have a space where they can literally speak their own language, figuratively and literally, and feel like, okay, there's room for me here. There's space for me, and I can say it in the way that I want to say it versus forcing it into another, language. Or with clients that aren't bilingual, but that are, women of color or queer or neurodivergent, I work with a lot of neurodivergent clients as well, is just being able to just be who you are. Not what I want is for you to come as you are and to even be more yourself by the time that
Hmm.
we finish working together. And so I think there's such a huge value in that. And the fact that I'm not in academia anymore in terms of like working for an institution, there's also a trust factor that is hard to get from someone who is also either in your university or even at a different university because our worlds are very small. So
Hmm.
there's something about talking to someone who is like confidentiality is key. That is just like, okay, I can kind of exhale, I can take off the mask, and I can just say what I need to say and not feel like, oh my God, is this going to make it into my tenure review? Is this going to make it into how someone sees my dissertation? That space is very sacred, I think, for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. You provide your clients with a space to unmask, to show up as their full selves, and to know that at the end of the day, they are seen and heard and supported. And that's something that we all deserve more spaces like that. I am so grateful that
Exactly.
you provide this kind of support. And I'm curious, actually, as we get close to wrapping up the episode, if there was any other question you were hoping I would ask you or anything else you want to touch on today with relation to your work, relation to your background, or just anything else that's coming up for you.
I mean, I would just say that, for anybody listening, that um, one thing I tell my clients all the time that I talked to earlier was that lean into the tensions. Just because you have tension or you have doubt or you have insecurity, don't run away from it. Like face it and write about it. Take that as part of what you write. And I think that because writing is healing, it can be even in academia, I would argue, especially so if you're writing about social justice issues, and to use that writing not only to present data and findings, but for yourself, to untangle, some of those tension, um, and to really explore your intuition, because I think that's what gets squashed in academia is like when you're like, God, my body feels some kind of way because of that comment that was made or that article that I read. And instead of embracing that feeling, we think, oh, it's negative. Let me just push it down. It's an opportunity. What you're thinking, what you think is not important, what you think you're going to be critiqued on, what you fear the most, that's what you need to write about because you're not the only person that feels that way. You're representing a lot of people. You may not know who they are, but you are. And so as raw and honest as you can be in your writing, you're really giving a gift to other people. You're inviting other people to show up authentically. So, a lot of times I just feel like writers, academics, they're wrestling with so much, but that struggle is what should be either moving your writing or subject of your writing or a combination of both, because I feel like it's in those points of tension, in those borders, in those in-between spaces and those crevices where the real power is, and where very engaging writing that has impact can happen.
I resonate a lot with what you shared. You said to lean into the tension. And a lot of times with my clients, when they come to me for a coaching session, that is the entire session. It's discussing the tension, discussing the pain point, discussing the challenge, and then uncovering the many layers of that onion to get to the root and then addressing that root, not ignoring it, not pretending it's not there, not going around it, but actually leaning into it. Like, what is it telling you about not just the writing, but even what is it telling you about you and your intuition? Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that. I love that you said that because it reminds me that leaning into your tensions provides you with opportunities for self-discovery. And even though that's not encouraged a lot of times in academia, it can still be part of the work that you do. So absolutely. I appreciate you for sharing that. Do you have any other closing words of advice for our listeners, primarily first gen, primarily BIPOC? I know I have a lot of Latina listeners too, undergrads, grad students. And I'm sure they can relate to this feeling of struggling in their writing or of falling into unhealthy patterns of feeling unworthy, of feeling like their work is not enough, or feeling like they can't show up as their full selves in their writing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, the journey in writing and in life, to me, is to arrive at that most authentic self. And we are always arriving. It's you get to one point and then you're like thinking about the next thing. But the most important thing is to feel the alignment between who you are, how your body feels, and what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so all of those things this is another topic, but I think we tend to carry a lot of shame, especially as women and women of color, and women of color academics around writing. We've all had experiences where someone has put us down in one way or another about our writing. And we've subconsciously let that define us. And so what I would say is explore that, write about that, lean into that, and you're going to emerge just a more evolved, authentic person as a result of that. So don't run from the tensions, engage the tensions, write about the tensions, and see writing as a potential mechanism for healing.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that we didn't mention shame earlier because it comes up so much. You said it when you said it could be an entire separate episode just talking about shame in writing. And, what that reminds me of is when I was in graduate school, I would always feel every time that I was sharing my writing with someone new, like I was exposing myself. I'm like, it feels like I'm a nudist. And I'm just like
Absolutely. Yeah,
showing you all
exactly.
my stuff, and you're not going to like what you. And I sense that sometimes with folks, if they ever share their writing, because I look at a lot of like grad admissions essays, for instance, and it's almost like folks are already justifying why it's terrible before I even open up the document. I'm like, I'm not here to judge. Like, you're just going
Exactly.
to
There's
work
a
with what you have.
defense that comes up right away,
Yeah.
right? And it
Yeah.
makes
And
sense.
but what I think is the key point that folks can carry with them is that, one, leaning into the thing, whether it's the shame or whatever other obstacles coming up your way, but then two, to pursue alignment. And I think that is key, because this is, like you said, it's an ongoing thing, just like
Yes.
healing is an ongoing cyclical thing. Your writing, your relationship to your writing, it's always going to be a thing. It's iterative, I like to say a lot of times. But if you're working towards alignment and you're getting closer to that, then I believe that you're on the right path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, anytime that you're in doubt, just say, am I feeling more in alignment with what I value and with who I am? And if the answer is no, step away. And if it's yes, then go all in.
Well, Doctora Aurora, I want to thank you, and I want to give you an opportunity to let our listeners know how they can connect with you, learn more about you and your work, support your work. So share whatever you're comfortable sharing, all the things to connect with you.
Ways. So www.aurorachang.com, very easy to remember. You can see all my services, but also learn more about me. Also, I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and it's Aurora Chang. Nothing say or spicy or creative in terms of names. And of course, I'm offering a webinar right now, a free webinar that is on my new writing framework, which is called the Anchor Writing Framework. It's also the basis for my new book that I'm in the process of writing and getting published. And it's really around tools that you can use when you feel really, really stuck. But the Anchor framework is also parallel to tools for life in terms of, that kind of alignment. And so the idea is to anchor yourself, to really ground yourself and to really trust in that. And that, the whole metaphor of anchor, right? That when the waters get really rough or when you don't know what direction you're going, that anchor will keep you safe and I'll keep you where you need to be. So yeah, those are some of the ways to get in touch with me and just stay connected.
Well, I am looking forward to having you back if and when the time comes for you to share more about your book, which I'm really excited about.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you once again. It's been so much fun chatting with you. I feel like we're in some ways kindred spirits in terms of the work that we do. I really, really appreciate you sharing space with us today. And yeah, I hope that our listeners got just as much as I did from the conversation. I'm sure they did. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.